This is one of my favorite episodes of the One Take Show. One of the conversations that is filled with passion with a charismatic guest that is extremely humble, and yet his achievements can literally spell out inspiration for any law student who is trying to make something of their career. Ladies and gentlemen, joining me today in this episode of the One Take Show is Dr. Kabir Duggal. Dr. Duggal is an attorney for Arnold Porter. He's a lecturer at Columbia Law School. He's been to some of the finest law schools across the world: Oxford, Leiden, Harvard, NYU, and our own Nalsa University. In this episode, Dr. Duggal is going to talk about the educational setup for law. He'll be comparing the legal education in India and abroad. He'll be telling us how big of a gap is there for law students in India to cover and how can we make the best of our law school. He's also talk about the various skill sets that is essential for any law student or legal aspirant to acquire for a successful career. And finally, we will talk about the changing contours in the field of international arbitration, dispute resolution, mediation, etc. Hence, let's jump right in. Hello Kabir, welcome to the One Take Show. I've been instructed by you to call you Kabir, although I would very earnestly want to call you sir because of your vast experience, the unlimited things that you have accomplished, and the paths that you have shown us, where we also can dream and somehow see ourselves reaching those benchmarks. So first of all, thank you so much for taking time off your very busy schedule and gracing my podcast today.
I'm very grateful to be here, and I insist you call me Kabir. I'm trying to hold on to my youth, so please don't take that away from me.
In that case, I will make it a point that I call you Kabir because the energy that I feel here for this conversation is so supportive and so positive, and I would like to bank on this energy so much right now.
Go for it.
Most certainly. Before we get into multiple portions of the conversations that we talk about, I would love to know about your journey. We've started with the National Law University, and you've made your way into some of the most reputed universities across the world, exploring so many opportunities, establishing so much, accomplishing so much. How has been this journey for you? How was the story like?
Thank you, Kaustubh. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I will share my journey with one small caveat, Everybody's path is unique. Everybody's path is different. To the extent, you want to look at somebody to see how it's worked out for them, I will share my path. Again, I do note when I had graduated, there was only one real law school in the country, national law school in the country. Legal education has really changed. The landscape has really changed in India today. Probably for the better. We're giving more opportunity across the country, which is a good thing. But that also increases a little bit the challenges that people like you face, So with these initial remarks, I went to the Government Law College in Mumbai.
Right.
Which is a fairly historical law school, But I do think the legal education had a very different model. There was greater emphasis put on practical experience. There was a greater, almost everybody around me was working while they were studying.
Right.
I believe that is slightly different with the educational system today, right? There's a lot more emphasis. So that was my educational background, and I wanted to become an international lawyer. That was my goal.
Right.
My particular aspiration at that time, but still remains a passion, was human rights law.
Right.
So after graduation, I worked for 2 years for UNICEF in Mumbai,
right,
which was a very fun experience. The work was very necessary, but it was work dealing with child trafficking.
Okay.
Which is obviously not a light issue, so to speak. After that, I went to Oxford in the United Kingdom to do my master's. The master there for common lawyers is the BCL degree. a lot of Oxford alums will tell you that that is the gold standard for a master's program, and it certainly was a very enjoyable experience.
Right.
I will just note in full disclosure that, the course offerings at Oxford were fairly limited.
Right.
So while it was a very enjoyable experience, it really didn't have a lot of creativity.
Right.
You have very set modules. The approach, for the want of a better term, is like a glorified Indian approach,
Right.
You study, you take an exam, you're graded on your exam.
Right.
And I wanted to delve a little more into international law, looking at specific areas. I wanted to do a little more writing. And so I applied to the United States.
Right.
It was my second master's, and so pretty much every school I applied, I got in. I'd like to believe it was brilliance, but I will also just note, life is very often a combination of good luck, chance. We should never discount these factors.
Right. I'm not going to argue against any one of these factors. I am completely going to buy it was your brilliance coupled.
That's very kind, Kaustubh. With time and age, you realize that luck has such an important role to play in life. And so, I had this very great scholarship, which made things easy.
Right.
When I studied, now just to contrast it, my fees in government law college was 800 rupees.
Wow.
For the semester.
Wow.
Now, if you just compare that to what you're paying,
yes.
And, I taught I'd done like a module at the National Law School in Jodhpur.
Right.
And when the students told me the fees, it sort of gave me a little bit of heartburn. And it's the same for a master's degree. These are very expensive programs. So getting a scholarship that covered everything made it easy.
Right.
Post-graduation, I had a little bit of a quarter life crisis.
Right.
To figure out, I wanted a steady job, which I realized with the UI and all, with human rights would be more difficult.
Right.
One of my professors recommended I look at arbitration, something I had not focused on thus far in my career.
Right.
And when I graduated, Lehman collapsed. So it was a really bad time, especially here in the US, to find a job. But this is where having mentors, having people who are invested in your success makes a difference. And I just encourage everybody as a point, reach out, find mentors, invest in that relationship.
Right.
Because I entered into arbitration, and to use the proverbial, life has never been the same after that, It's been a very exciting journey, a journey that I'm still figuring things out. But I think I'll stop here so you can come and ask me further questions and we can carry on the dialogue.
No, but this very specific thing that I have noticed, you've mentioned about GLC, and even today GLC is celebrated as one of the colleges that offer a practical sort of an experience to the law students, where the independence is actually given to the internships and everything else. Whereas in law schools like national law universities, we don't have that kind of time or the kind of exposure that a practical experience would really give us. So we solely rely on internships, which are either annual basis or semi-annual basis. And this is a huge limitation, especially for people who are trying to get into litigation, would definitely want to work with a senior lawyer or an advocate and want to learn from the experiences. How big of a role do you think this plays? Because you've had a first-hand experience with GLC, the practical experience, the ability to actually go out and learn from the business whilst also being in law school. How big of an influence does that make?
Sure. Now, I will start off with a very big caveat. I did not intern when I was studying.
Right.
And the reason is, I think fairly early in my career, I realized that I wanted to do a master's. I wanted to enter into academia, those sort of aspirations. So I thought, academics is a very important aspect that I should focus on. So I'll put that on the table for what it's worth. Having said that, the point you are making is a good one. If you want to do litigation, if you're 100% certain this is what I was meant to do, this is my calling in life, having this practical experience definitely helps.
Right.
Law is an art, but it's also a science, but it's also a profession that, you master and perfect your art by doing it. So if you start early, you do get some bit of an advantage. The flip side, life is always pros and cons, right? The flip side, I think, is sometimes you come out with very good practical experiences. You know how to do things. But you don't come out with a very firm foundational basis on your subjects. I'm not saying one is better or one is worse. These are the pros and cons you will have. You really know how things work and things of that nature. You may not be, you may not know nuances in civil procedure, case law, for example.
Right. And to that extent, this also begs the question that you've had an experience with some of the best universities in the world, with SJD in Harvard, or we say BCL in Oxford, just to name a few. You've had the kind of changes that you might have observed with the pedagogy or the kind of education that the best universities in the world provide, as against what the best universities in India provide. How big of a gap is there for law students in India to cover? Like, you've had an illustrious career which has been inspiring a lot of students, and they looked up to the standards that you've set. Those standards must have come from some sort of different style of education that must have been provided by different universities. How big of this gap do you observe is there, and how much do we need to work harder to somehow make ourselves potential candidates for industries like international arbitration or international human rights and stuff like that?
That's a good question. There's a lot in that question, but it is a good one. There are some classical differences that we know between education in India and education in the West.
Right.
And one thing that, this is too trivial, but I think it is worth honing in, education in India is typically centered around exams, right? When you have practical courses, clinics, I understand, are becoming popular. But I still think the focus tends to be on examination. That's how you're graded. That's how you're put in. That's what's going to decide your career.
Right.
I think in contrast, education, particularly in the United States, less so in the UK, but definitely in the United States, is based on class participation, right? The proverbial Socratic method to education. Where, you have to read things in advance.
Right.
You come to your class, you're not as such lectured on topics, right? It is going to be a test on what the professor is going to ask you on things you have read in advance.
Right. Now,
this is a very different approach. I had tried the Socratic method whenever I come to India, and I try to force people to read things. And it's just a different mindset. I always find, I mean this in a very nice way, but I always find resistance. And, the approach is, but we're coming to a class to learn. What are you, this is flipping around the process.
Right.
You are often also not just graded on an exam if you have an exam.
Right.
So the grading process is completely decentralized in the US. This is not the case in the UK. But in the US, you can be graded on class participation. You can be graded on writing a paper. You can be graded on, the experience is very different.
Right.
And that requires some getting used to. The LLM program in the US is a very short program. It's 9 months.
Right.
That's when a baby is born, right? You have to really be ready to speak up in class, to be able to contribute, to really prepare.
Right.
There's a different style in drafting which you need to get familiar with.
Right.
So I'll stop here so you can continue this dialogue.
No. I in fact, I will ask my last question in this segment of educational setups. I won't bore you much with this, but the educational setup is something that law students, especially in India, with so much time that we have due to lockdown, have forced us to think as to how much opportunities can we actually exploit with the kind of resources that we have. You've been a lecturer with Columbia Law School for almost a decade now, and you must have observed certain characteristics that really help law students or really help the atmosphere that is created for learning. At best, like how can students exploit those opportunities? And in law schools, what are those essential features or essential characteristics that law students can pick on? For example, as extracurriculars or anything for that matter. What are those points that we can pick on so that we can improve our profile and improve our personality with time?
Great, that's a great question. Again, a very deep question.
Thank you.
Look, education in the US, but I think even in the UK, right? You're looking for fully formed people.
Right.
So you want to make sure your resume shows a fully formed person, and that means you have done very well academically.
Mm-hmm.
That is pivotal. But you know you've done good moods, you've written articles, you've done the right courses, you've been socially responsible.
Right.
My own suggestion here would be pick up a few things and do them well, rather than have the kitchen sink approach, I think we proverbially also call that the shit on the fan, right? Just do everything, but do them, a little bit here or there. Internships are valuable to the extent you're getting skills.
Right.
Now, a lot of Indians reach out to me that they want to do virtual internships.
Right.
The experience is a mixed bag. You will find some people who are very conscientious, who really take the work. Now, this is life at large. This is anything in life. But who are really committed. They want to learn. They are responsive. They are serious, and they do it like their life depends on it. And then you have people who sometimes just disappear.
Right.
I'll get like emails for weeks, asking me, and I appreciate that. Life is happening. So, if you nudge me, I'm happy. But, you find an assignment, you create something and then give it to a person and then they disappear.
Right.
So the point that I would make is whenever you take anything, do it serious, do it with the learning experience, do it thoughtfully.
Right.
I'll make one final point just because you asked what is the model to succeed.
Right.
And I think the model to succeed boils down to the two basic things. Can you communicate in an effective manner? Can you make your argument in a coherent, supportive manner? And can you write well? That's what we're supposed to do as lawyers, right?
Right.
Can you write well? Can you speak well? The Indian writing is, I will never say it's bad. That is, it's different from the way people will write in the United States.
Right.
And you need to adjust to the reality if you're in this market to how Americans write.
Right.
So I will stop there. We can talk further about this to the extent there is interest.
Yes, most certainly. But you brought something at the end of this conversation which really intrigues me. And this is a very selfish question. Like to all my listeners, I'm asking this for my self-benefit as well.
Go for it.
About communication as an extremely important asset. And I believe writing and communication, as you mentioned, helps the legal professionals as well. What tips do you have? Like you must have observed certain strategies that people might use to actually get better at, let's say, legal writing or drafting, or let's say communication from your practical experience as well, or as an experience as a lecturer, the communication aspect or the writing aspect. How can we improve upon that?
Sure. I mean, the process will be slightly different for the two. For your verbal communication, you need to practice.
Right.
You need to practice, especially if you're if you're an introverted person.
Right.
Clearly, you are not one of those. The fact that you're doing a podcast means you are extroverted. But this is the problem. If you're not a confident person, you need to practice. Right. You need to practice putting your point forward in a succinct manner. You need, when you're making an argument, to make sure your argument is conveyed effectively, it is supported. How do you use humor? All that requires you to practice. Again, this is a skill that you perfect with time.
Right.
Written communication requires a lot of practice, but here there are also tips. The global trend towards drafting has placed a lot of emphasis in keeping our drafting simple.
Right.
Now, this is something Indian lawyers particularly have a disadvantage because of our colonial heritage.
Right.
We like to use long sentences. There's a lot of adjectives put in. You're almost told never to use an adjective in legal drafting unless it is absolutely necessary.
Right.
This is an outrage. All these phrases have to be out.
Right.
Sentences should never be more than 2 lines, 3 lines.
Right.
Crisp. It should follow a linear progression, point A to point B to point C. This requires a lot of practice.
Right.
I would urge folks who are interested in writing, Google this guy, Brian Gardner.
Okay.
Brian Gardner, Garner.
Right.
He's one of the most definitive authors for legal writing. He has many books. I think one of his famous books is Legal Writing in Plain English.
Right.
And that's the emphasis. No Latin, no fancy terms, no adjectives. It requires you to unlearn a lot what we think scholarly legal writing sounds like.
Right. Right.
So I would urge you to read that. But that is a skill I would focus on because people look at your writing as the first thing to judge you.
Yes. Right. True.
I'll stop here.
As we actually, as law students, have been conditioned for the verbosity that we observe everywhere. We see the judgments, they're too long as against the judgments. For example, in international arbitration, if you go about for the UNSOTRAL cases, or we look at the exit cases, they're very brief, very precise, very to the point, as against the Indian courts who just spell the judgments out. With all due respect to all the Indian courts, this is a topic which has been discussed over a period of time. But I think for the legal professional writing, and for anyone who's trying to learn from your various accomplishments when it comes to legal writing, would really benefit from all the tips that you've mentioned. At this point, I think I would take this conversation to a very interesting sphere and ask you a rather generic but a very pertinent question at this point of time. From your practical experience with international arbitration and the various engagements that you've had, you must have observed certain changes that are now surfacing because of the pandemic. And it is affecting the practice in practical sense, and it is forcing the law firms, international law firms, lawyers to adopt. What are those major changes, and how are the law firms and lawyers and leaders in this field adapting to them?
It's a great question. Again, it's one of those questions, you ask hard questions. We can spend all day here talking about it, but at a high level, the full consequences of the pandemic are not known at this stage.
True.
It is not going to be nice or pretty. We know that.
Right.
But we still are coping with the reality of COVID. Both the United States and India, we're not seeing a decline in numbers, we're seeing severe consequences. So we still need to give it a little bit of time. One positive development that we are seeing is that folks are suddenly appreciating benefits of doing things virtually.
Right.
This was a reality that 3 months ago, if you told most people, hey, let's have a hearing virtually, that would have sounded, you would have received backlash and criticisms pretty much across the board.
Yes.
Things like we're doing, you are in India, I'm here in New York.
Yeah.
An idea of having a conversation like this would, for all practical purposes, have been unthinkable.
Yes, most certainly.
The pandemic has suddenly made us realize that, we can do things more efficiently. We can do a cross-examination. All the arbitral institutions are coming up with mechanisms for virtual hearings.
Right.
All this is still TBD, so to speak. We have to see how it's going to work out for a multi-billion-dollar dispute.
Right.
But the fact that we are moving and considering realities of using technology is a positive thing, is something we should celebrate. It brings the world closer. at a time when we see the world becoming more
very divided in multiple senses.
Yeah, very divided, very, outward, inward looking, not outward looking.
Right.
This may be one step to help connect us. So
True.
I will not get more technical than that right now.
But you raise a very important point, and this is actually something that we have for recent various developments that we've observed. We've seen that the changes that are happening on the larger scale, the economic nationalization by certain countries or the inward-looking policies by certain countries has really affected international dispute resolution in a way or the other. And have you observed certain changes in the practice in totality when it comes to international dispute resolution as an industry evolving at this point?
I mean, yes, most certainly. I mean, you definitely see this global trend of nationalism and patriotism and all that affecting the international regime at large.
Right.
You look at the international trade system.
Right.
WTO, and that system is barely functioning because of international politics. Investor-state arbitration, right? Disputes involving state or state entities. We're at a pivotal moment, right? There is a heavy backlash. There is this global rethink, a lot of which is justified. Like, let me just put that on the table. There are very serious and genuine criticisms. The query is how much of this will relate to less ideal goals that that we have to be mindful of. The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, till recently was never a significant body for dispute resolution. It never had any serious cases. 5-10 years ago, you would always say the ICJ is ineffective. It doesn't deal with serious matters. Today, for better or worse, all predominantly political disputes are going before the ICJ.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see the international landscape and how it may evolve. At this stage, it's too soon for us to tell, but it is an interesting moment.
Right.
In the landscape. There are definitely going to be changes.
Right.
Back to you.
With these changes, I think one very important question now arises on behalf of all the law students or law aspirants who somehow aim to either go and follow your path or somehow make their space and want to follow your work into international arbitration, international dispute resolution as a very prolific field as it is. What advices would you have for all those aspirants, as in even before pandemic or after pandemic, the changes that are now happening? What are those various skill sets or various preparations that we as aspirants or legal law students should keep in our mind when we try and plan for international dispute resolution as an industry? Is there any certain set of skills that we need to acquire, or certain set of connections that we need to make, or we need to be equipped with a certain task force or with abilities or something of that sort?
I mean, in terms of skill sets, I think the skill sets remain the same, right? You should be able to write effectively and speak effectively. I will make one general point.
Right.
A lot of people who are internationally inclined like to do arbitration, and we welcome that. We want more people to join it. But I will note that as a practice area, it still tends to be fairly small. It still tends to be I think the global perception of how big it is actually not borne out in facts. So I just want to put this on the table because, we always get these really bright and capable students who want to do a master's and come here. And then there's a lot of heartburn, especially when the reality hits you as to how small the practice really is.
Right.
Having said that, if this is an area that you are interested in, definitely make sure you're doing things in that field.
Right.
So you can build a coherent story to tell somebody that I want to do arbitration. It's interesting when people tell you, in the email or cover letter, I really want to do arbitration. And then you look at the resume and there's nothing of arbitration on it.
Right.
And that just sort of begs the question, like, are you telling this to everybody? You know, are you telling a corporate lie? I really want to do corporate law.
Right.
You know, if you want to do arbitration, participate in the Wismut, write articles, participate in the journal, read Kluwer arbitration blog, do the things that show that you're a person interested, do the courses in arbitration, of course.
Right.
This is general life advice for life at large, you know. When you say you are interested in something, try to kind of back that up. You know, people can figure these things out. It's not hard.
Right. True.
That's what I would suggest. You know, try to build your profile. Can you change your interest? I've done human rights and today I want to do arbitration. Of course you can.
Okay.
Of course you can change your mind. Yeah, you know, a part in life is you're ready to evolve, your needs can change, but you need to have a coherent story to justify that.
Right.
It's better to be upfront and treat your reader with respect, not like they're an idiot, but giving an honest reason. I think people generally appreciate truthful responses. So I'll stop there so you can say.
That I believe is probably one of the most important advice that I have received lately, which talks about how exactly we need to take our approach to any field, very specifically international dispute resolution, very seriously, and possibly working on a profile and improving upon our experience and actually showing that we have worked and learned in that and worked in order to improve our profile in this area would really help. I think this has been a wonderful conversation. Anyone who tunes into this podcast, this episode particularly, will benefit a lot from your experience with law, your experience with various universities. We've talked about so many things, especially legal writing, conversation, and international dispute resolution. Do you have any closing remarks for our listeners?
I mean, I would only wish everybody success. Look, everybody's path is different. Everybody's path is unique. You know, give yourself the freedom to explore things, to practice things. And you know, there are moments when you're going to feel dejected, when things are not going. Just muster courage and carry on.
Right.
You know, this is a journey. This is the long haul that you need to focus on. So just encourage you to be positive. Try to make the best you can. And I wish you all success.
Well, thank you so much. I believe I have personally benefited a lot from this episode, and I feel very confident when I say everyone else who tunes into this podcast will really benefit a lot from this. And I intend on staying in touch with you so that I can keep learning from you from time to time again. I had a wonderful time personally, and I hope you had a good time too.
Very much so. It's been a delight. It's been a very fluid conversation. I'm delighted to be here. So thank you very much. Here virtually.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity.
Cheers. Have a good one. Kaustubh, be safe, everybody.